5 years or more playable content for England, but I'm fairly sure that England was updated. I just don't think it's updated on their homepage. Fairly sure it's one of them. The gears move. The funny thing about moving any machine is that it keeps on moving, even when the operator is no longer there to guide it. Everyone can agree the statement applies to the HMMLR, but with different definitions. The collaborationist government thinks that the organisation is like a speeding car with no driver, going aimlessly until it runs out of fuel or veers off the road and comes to a halt. They see the rebellion as a shadow of its former self, huddled in the hills or cowering in the sewers, and a victory for the law and order against the forces of anarchy is a matter of when, instead of if. The men and women of the HMMLR, however, prefer a different analogy. They see themselves as a different machine, one that does not need an operator once activated, one that can safely be left alone until the moment to fill its duty is at hand. They are a ticking time bomb, and they are counting down to the beginning of His Majesty's speech. HMMLR's weapons goes up, political power goes up, and we have the stirrings of a plan. Speaking of the stirrings of a plan, we now have access to the state of the nation. And we can see support and stability. So we have a bunch of things which use political power, which we'll take a look at in a minute. And then we have the northern territories, which are mostly HMMLR support. We have the Midlands, which aren't. And then we have the south, which is very much in the hands of the government forces. So, do we want to empower our northern territories, or do we want to start expanding support in, say, the West Midlands, which is a pretty big industrial hub? I think we want to try and go for the West Midlands if we can. It's a 50-50 right now. In fact, all of them are. The HMMLR OFN relations, naturally, to conduct any serious operation requires weapons. This means rifles, grenades, ammunition, etc. We need to prepare ourselves for a general uprising as well, which will require arming even more people than we do now. One way to get this through, legally questionable means, namely the gun trade. We can get guns through the OFN countries using contracts friendly towards us. However, the actual number of our guns to get through is dependent on how stable Northern England is. Once we're able to openly confront the government, those guns will be issued as infantry equipment to our troops. The higher the state stability is in Newcastle, Lancashire and Yorkshire, the higher chances our guns get through, and the less will be lost to the government. Each month relations will passively degrade by a small amount. So we currently have 500 guns, and we have moderate relations. In fact, I think we can actually... No, that's just the elections. It's kind of cool that this is interactive. So how do we actually begin working on changing their trends? So we can go for some shipments. The United States of America might be the primary member of the OFN, but is far from the only one. In Canada, former members of the government are willing to speak, and if need be act on our behalf. In Australia and New Zealand, there are exiles aplenty, whilst the Caribbean Federation holds a great deal of wealth that might be diverted towards our cause. Let's reach out to these groups and let us asking them for one final effort with the promise of a free England at the end of it. Reach out to the USA politicians. HMMLR can boast of public acclaim in the United States for sure, but as with any nation, the true power lies with those who lead it. Luckily for us, elements of all parties appear willing to hear us out. The MPP have a grudging respect for the left resistance, and close ties between the Republican Democrats and the HMMLR proper have existed since the war. Persuading them to give us some support with their friends in power might go a long way. or run a pro-HMMLR media campaign. The United States of America represents the largest portion of potential OFN support, far more even than our Canadian connections can grant us. It might be worth investing in a series of media campaigns to accrue public interest in the HMMLR and its cause. Interviews with members of our organisation based in Ottawa are broadcast to screens and radio sets all across America would give us a massive amount of public sympathy and potentially support, but we only have the funds to pull this off once. Or pro-HMMLR speakers tour the OFN. Very rarely, the diverse nature of our organisation can come in useful for accruing notoriety and support overseas. The HMMLR might not be the most appealing of rebel organisations to every potential public figure in the OFN, but we alone can appeal to the socialists with the left resistance, military hawks with Stalling's men, and idealists with the HMMLR proper. No other rebel group has been able to claim so much support, and we need every bit of it. Over time, our popularity gain could be quite substantial. Multiple small OFN relationship boosts over time, so I think that's probably the one that we want to do. The collaborationist government is like a sieve. Nothing stays secret for long and everything can be bought for a price. In this case, the boss has received information the traitor King Edward is going to be making a speech to calm the nation in his time of uncertainty. How quaint. Well, it just won't do to have our organisation be unrepresented at this momentous occasion. Indeed, we ought to send representatives of our own to the proceedings, heavily armed representatives. Of course, this isn't the kind of action that can take place without extensive planning. HMMLR needs to prepare our response to the collaborationist attempts to hide the truth of how they have failed England and its people. With some luck, our message will ring out forever. Send in the agents. Periodic change of the safety of the future speech. Anti-government propaganda. Or infiltrate the palace. The king is planning to give his wonderful speech from Buckingham Palace, we know this for certain. If we have enough of our people next to the king, a chance to do a great show is greater for us. Huzzah! Insane Flapjack, thank you very much for the 6-month resubscription. Very much appreciate that, thank you. Whoop, new horns. This dark day is a highlight. I hope you're doing okay. And Brown Pit wants me to drink some tea. I haven't played this mod because it looks quite complicated, but it looks so well done. I would heartily recommend that you try it and play in Russia. Kemerovo was a great starting place, really. There's lots going on in Siberia, so just choose one of the Russian warlords and play as them. It'll do a really good job of introducing you to what on earth is going on. Still find this mod almost impossible to watch. Sorry. Teaching on a Sunday, there's a national holiday coming up, so need to make up days. Really? Ugh, man, that sucks. So yeah, I feel for you. Making up for a national... Well, I guess in teaching you would have to. Alright, so we have got 91 points because we just stupidly spent about 50. I feel like we want to get the one going on over time. The earlier we get this, the better. It's only going to leave us with 11 points for this, but so be it. Alright. Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins. Loved watching the past 2 series of this mod. Great stories, and with all the polls, it's pretty cool to see where things would end up. Yeah, it's trying it for you. It's an 8-day holiday, to be fair. Ah, okay. Hitler named Spears as his successor. Following the recent attempt on the German Führer's life by a suspected Kenpentai agent, the pressure on the Führer to name an official successor for the Reichstag to formally recognise the choice has been steadily building. After almost a week of debate and speculation, Adolf Hitler today appeared on live television from the Reichstag and announced to the Reich that his successor would be Albert Speer. A highly controversial choice, Speer enjoys the support from the left-leaning members of the Reichstag and the liberal movement in Germany due to his advocacy of extensive economic and political reform. The decision has upset the more conservative elements within the Reich, however, with Martin Bormann, Hermann Göring and Reinhard Heydrich even denouncing the choice. Well, that's definitely a different move than usual. Yeah, that is definitely a first. Send in the agent. Costs us 50 guns. Active for 2 days. Periodic change of the safety of the future speech, minus 50%. Oh, I see. It drops that. To stop them from increasing it, I guess, over time. So how fast am I getting political power? 0.31 a day. Not very. National focus completed. The stirrings of a plan. No one quite knew who the boss actually was. Oh, to be sure, everyone knew Mad David Stirling and the Red General Alexander. One had refused to surrender with the rest of the army, had fought on to the since the end of the war. The other was the most notorious communist to have escaped Cable Street. Some thought these two were the leaders of the HMMLR, and the boss was a smokescreen, a fiction to keep the traitors' attention elsewhere. Griselda personally thought it unlikely, as she looked on the two. In spite of their collegiality in pointing out the key locations of the map of London, all she could think about was they obviously didn't like each other very much. It was the small things. The way Stirling grimaced when Alexander rebuked the idea of placing dynamite on the bridge on account of the casualties, or how Alexander frowned when Stirling suggested the men would be better suited to an open attempt on the king. Griselda was at the meeting because she was the highest-ranking cell leader in London, not forced underground. A sobering thought, considering she wasn't even in her 30s. There'd been plenty who came before her and plenty who'd come after, it seemed, and that was the idea formed in her mind. What if I do it? She interrupted in a small voice. The two HMMLR leaders looked up at her in surprise. Bill Alexander gestured for her to continue while Stirling looked her over with a fresh eye, as if searching for something he'd missed before. I mean, I walk in through the square every day for work. The bobbies know me well enough, they won't think twice as to why I'm going so close to the cordon. Griselda stopped and awaited the two's response. In the end, it was Stirling who answered. How familiar are you with grenade throwing? The HMMLR is all sorts, including the brave ones. Big, big love. It's a good icon, that one. Safety of the future speech, minus 10. Periodic change in safety speech, minus 2.5. Most of the HMMLR are moderates by any sense of the word, men and women who want freedom more than anything more specific. David Stirling and Bill Alexander have other goals. Stirling wants revenge. He is about the only surviving man still in the country who never surrendered, and he's lost a lot of friends for that. Bill Alexander wants his revolution, though. He's willing to forego that, get the Germans out of Britain for good. He lost a lot of friends on 3rd Cable Street during the first uprising, but he survived, and he'll have his turn to do the killing. Auchinleck, meanwhile, he wants the Traitor King's speech to be a proper show, complete with the HMMLR as the entertainment. Stirling and Alexander might hate each other's guts, but they've got more experience in guerrilla warfare. But they've got more experience in guerrilla warfare than the rest of the HMMLR combined. Time for them to use it. I think that they may have just spoiled who the boss is. Because that's the first time Auchinleck's been mentioned. Okay, so we're about to get more periodic change. I think I might send in the agents again, drop it by another 5%, and we'll be at minus 7.5%, which I think is a good amount. And we also have some more political power. I think we're going to wait until we hit 50, and then reach out for the OFN contacts. It really feels like I should be influencing this in some way, but I don't know how. Ignore the Auchinleck behind the curtain, yeah. Start support for territories after the speech. Okay. Later. Cool. Good to know. I thought so. That is in fact just going down at the moment. Okay. He had no He had no diet. Oh, for Pete's sake. Losing my accents. He had no doubt that right as he was standing over the map of London, the reactionaries would be sending a dozen raids after him in England's north. Such a shame they couldn't realise he was in the basement not a kilometre away from Buckingham Palace itself. Bill Alexander chuckled at the thought, gaining the attention of the man next to him. Sometimes Bill regretted signing the left resistance up with the HMMLR, and any time he had to work personally with David Stirling only made him the feeling resurface. The man was effective, to be sure. Stirling had kept his commanders alive by sheer unrelenting determination for 20 years, but he was also ruthless and unconcerned with civilian casualties, which made Bill think he was quite possibly mad. Bill had his men smuggle in the grenades in the days before the arrival, and Philby had sent word to the reactionaries still thought Bill was in Manchester. Stirling, in turn, had escorted Bill down to the Traitor Central, as the ex-SAS referred to London. The king wouldn't like a welcome they had prepared for him. Stirling was glancing at him to see if the chuckle had meant anything, but Bill just waved him off. The evacuation point is the boat in the Thames, which will take you north, you understand? Finish any unfinished business you have here, because you won't be coming back any time soon. To her credit, Griselda, the local HMMLR cell leader, just nodded, committing the plan to memory. Against his expectations, Bill was starting to have a good feeling about this whole exercise. He only hoped that Claude was still handling things in his absence. Let's get this party started. Almost there. The King's speech is shaping up to be quite the event. Some might want to break out the champagne and call it a day, but London is practically being isolated in preparation for it. The question on everyone's lips, though, is why? Third Cable Street was years ago, and there hasn't been any real violence in London since. It's almost like the government is worried about something. The press, for their part, are busy speculating and issuing declarations of solidarity, but some speculate as to whether it's quite necessary to block off all of London and put in curfews for what is, at best, a theoretical threat. The government, for its part, has decided that they will go ahead with these measures anyway. There we go, minus 7.5. Both periodic change of the safety of the future speech and the safety of the future speech itself will change by a random amount. Guessing that's because something hasn't come out yet. Because that sounds like it's two different things. Menjiang's defeated the Mongolian People's Front. Oh, that doesn't usually happen. Usually these guys win. Order has been restored. That's just made Kemerovo's life a bit harder. National focus completed. Edward VIII listened as the chief of the City of London Police outlined his plans for the security with something approaching a dull interest. The King of England didn't really know why the man insisted upon having so many rotations of the guards between the location of the speech, but given recent events, Edward was inclined to listen. Whispers had reached Edward that the HMMLR intended to kill him at the speech, something that he initially refused to believe. Surely, no group loyal to his niece would kill the reigning monarch. At the same time, a voice in his head asked, what if they were right? Edward hadn't got any sleep for days. Wallace had noted and started fretting, only making the whole affair worse. Edward had resolved not to have her present at the speech. That way, even if something did go wrong, she would not be in the line of fire. As for himself, well, as his brother had always been so fond of saying, he had a duty to attend to. Griselda had memorised every guard rotation. Stirling had insisted upon it. Alexander had gone over the evacuation route with her and gotten her to warn her brother and mother ahead of time, once he'd gotten assurances they weren't likely to turn traitor. The main thing that Griselda had worked on was her throwing skills, where once she might have had all the skill of some toff fresh out of a bar, she now had at least a basic grasp of distance and the timing needed before she ran. She was ready, and Griselda dearly hoped that it would be enough. The die is cast. Security of the speech is the coloured bar. Periodical change is the number under which signifies how much the bar changes. Oh, so this actually bops that, and then this is bopping that. Okay. In that case, yeah, our periodic change is really, really high. It's not very safe. Are we the HMMLR? We are, yes. I need a new national focus. TikTok. Oh, no, we can't. There we are, below 20%. We can now grab writing on the wall. One need only look at the streets of London to see how ripe the city is for revolution. It's like the bale of hay, only in the need of a spark to set the entire house afire. The police are no problem. Those who aren't on our side will be dealt with by those who are. If they can't be bribed into staying back, of course. The crowds, that will be something Bill's lad solved. Turns out, when you know half the unions in the country, you can get quite a few of them to turn out and act as a disruptive influence for a public event, like this speech. With Sterling's lot acting as civvies to lead them, we ought to give the king a right surprise when he turns off for tea and biscuits, something this entire country will remember forever. Going forward, you're represented by blue in the menus. Cool. As Timothy O'Flaherty sat on the couch with telly turned to some children's show, he reflected that maybe you should take a day off work more often. Not every month, not even every 6, but once a year wouldn't do any harm. His daughters seemed ignorant of the fact that he was watching them instead of their mother and had busied themselves assembling the dollhouse he brought with what he was telling Martha was a special bonus. Truth be told, it was a special bonus. Wasn't every day a man showed up at your door, offered you 500 quid to stay home on a specific day. Tim wouldn't have acted on it except for the fact that he'd caught several of the younger constables chatting amongst themselves on the subject, and upon some discreet inquiries had even discovered his boss, the chief inspector, was taking the King's Speech off. If everyone was doing it, why not him? He could think of a lot of things he'd rather do than stand about in a line all day and watch the crowd riot. Something that was reinforced as his wife brought the tea tray out and set it on the table. Ah, yeah, no need to go into work today. Family can be its own reward. The King's Speech. The day has come. King Edward VIII of the House of Windsor may not be a well-liked man, but he is nonetheless the King of England. The speech, it would appear, will start at midday and go on for an hour or so before His Majesty attends a late lunch with some notable public figures. Of course, that assumes everything goes to plan. Both the HMMLR and the government know something will occur, but what exactly happens is up to the will of God at this point. The coin of history tosses and turns in the air, the face upon it which will land unknown by even those who threw it. Perhaps the The HMMLR, god damn it, that's a hard word to say, will be correct in their assumption that it will be dry tinder needs a spark. Or perhaps the government prepared well. Who can say? Only one way to find out. No more preparations. Edward goes live. Does Scotland have a focus tree? I don't think so. No. Oh, yes. Yes, it does. Interesting. Might need to play as Scotland in the future. Scotland! Alright, so we got the infantry weapon improvement. I think we're going to continue on that line, though. Guns are important. Menjiang declared war on the People's Revolutionary Council. Okay. Ah! And we can also start working on the OFN again. So I think what I'm going to do is reach out to the contacts right now, which is a large OFN relationship boost. Oh, relations already high. I may not need to do this. I don't know if 72.5 is high or not. Because we could try and get that big shipment through, but I'm guessing that only 72% of it will get through. I think I'm going to wait. We might need the political power at that point. Even Wales has a tree. Northern Ireland too, but the Irish Republic doesn't. Ulster doesn't. Wales does. Republic of Ireland doesn't. The grenade toss had been almost perfect, landing amongst the people behind the king rather than at the traitor's feet, but the result had been impressive nonetheless. The king had been hustled off unarmed, but his cronies hadn't been so lucky. Griselda had left London with the help of Stirling's men and Alexander's smugglers and had been taken north. Deep into the north too, past Yorkshire at least if she was to be any judge. It wasn't until Griselda entered the small house in the middle of nowhere that she realised that her actions truly meant. The men with her had talked about taking her to see the boss, and of the 5 people in the room it was obvious who it was. It wasn't Bill Alexander, standing aside with a beer in hand and chatting with a thin gentleman in a suit. It wasn't Stirling, catching the first bit of sleep he'd seen in days. It was a figure almost every English citizen knew. Member of Parliament Claude Auchinleck, a former general who had been the last British officer holding his position at the time of the surrender to Germany. A living legend in every sense of the word, and evidently the leader of Her Majesty's most loyal resistance. Griselda gave a salute. She entered in, but waved it off and invited her to sit. They talked for a long time about how the sacrifice of a civilian life was appreciated, how her family had been evacuated along with the rest of her cell, and about her future career prospects. The HMMLR had need of operatives to ferry communication between the cells that couldn't be trusted to regular couriers, and according to Auchinleck, she fit the bill perfectly. Death to the traitors! Changes the national focus tree to Ingvit Preakwa Mur. Assassination attempt on Edward VIII. In stunning news today, the King of England, Edward VIII, has had a narrow escape from assassination during a speech he was performing outside of Buckingham Palace. The assassin, believed to be a radical member of the organisation, the HMMLR, attempted to throw a grenade at the monarch in the middle of a speech, and was only stopped by the fact the device landed amidst the members of the government standing behind the king, shielding him from its wrath. This is a public representation of the instability many have long believed hides amidst the facade of civility in modern England. Apparently God was fond of the king on this day. And now, we're on the days of resistance. Has there been a new update of the mod? Don't think so. Auchinleck, Alexander and Stirling. The first is a name not known to too many, aside from a curiosity being the last general standing when the call to the surrender was sounded. The second is probably the best known by the general public, one of the few rebels to escape Cable Street and a constant reminder of those darker times. Stirling is known only by those who hunt him, those who still live. Together they represent the HMMLR, an organisation dedicated to as many of the causes as its members have political leanings, but undeniably united in the desire for a free England. One free of tyranny, free of traitors, and free of the Germans. The partnership is one of convenience, but all involved intend to see it out till the end, until the collaborationists are defeated or they've died trying. Gets the event men of the resistance modify own people's hate by giving us more political power. Which I guess is gonna come in handy. Ah, here we go, propaganda campaigns. So yeah, we can choose the different states and then choose to do propaganda campaigns.